Now I remember particularly Brahmananda, who was sitting at Prabhupada's feet right next to him and looking up at Prabhupada, and Brahmananda started trembling. And then he let out a gasp. He just went, oh, like that. And I don't know if Prabhupada stopped when he heard that or not, but it was an extraordinary moment. Srila Prabhupada was just, he was there. He was with the cowherd boys, thinking nothing but Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. But we used to say, it was, I suppose, innocent of us, but anyway, we used to say that Prabhupada had Krishna painted on the inside of his eyelids. So whenever he closed his eyes, he would see Krishna. It was simple-minded, but it showed something of our appreciation for him.
Prabhupada is sitting with there's a cushion from a sofa. I picked that up off the street. Someone had thrown out an old sofa. I picked up the cushion and brought it. And Prabhupada used it. There was no money, no books. I mean, there was no income. Prabhupada would pass the basket at the end of the kirtan and collect maybe $3. People would put coins in, quarters. Prabhupada's first instruction to me was to do my job. I was a teacher for New York City Board of Education, and to give, he said, give your salary to Krishna. You know, I thought I would give up my job. Prabhupada said, no, you do your job. And I asked Prabhupada, well, how do I give my salary to Krishna? Prabhupada said, well, you give it to me, and I'll give it to Krishna. I said, okay. And that's how we were running on. But we had no money. We were using as a subji in the summertime. Prabhupada started in the summer, it was May 66 at 26 2nd Avenue. We would get watermelon, because watermelon was so cheap, 10 cents a pound. And then we'd eat the watermelon and then take the rind and cook that as a subji. And that was one of the best, the big subjis, the watermelon rinds.
When Srila Prabhupada first settled into the 26 2nd Avenue, he put a sign on the door saying, any young man who wants to follow these rules and regulations can stay here and learn from me. That's a paraphrase. So, of course, some young men came in. He had already had some disciples, and they moved in and stayed in the storefront. And they would take a shower up in the apartment. The storefront was in a front part of the building that had apartments above it. But then there was a courtyard in the middle. And then there was what's called the rear court building, and that's where Srila Prabhupada's apartment was, on the 2nd floor with windows looking out onto the courtyard. And we used to chant our japa walking around and around in the courtyard. And Srila Prabhupada would look out the window and see us doing our japa, and he'd be very pleased to see his disciples doing that. At that time, the only record, the LP, that had come out was the Krishna Consciousness LP. Well, we would play that, Srila Prabhupada speaking, and his singing of the Sangsara prayers, and also the kirtan on the other side. We would play them in the apartments, but with the speakers right up in the windows going out onto the street, so that the sound of the kirtan was blaring out up and down the block, so everybody could hear it. So we weren't at all shy in those days about presenting Krishna consciousness to the masses. But many people became introduced to Krishna consciousness, or at least the chanting of the Maha Mantra, through those speakers, because people all up and down the streets, when they saw us walking up and down, they would go, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And that's how they got to know us.
This is Brahmananda, who's Gargamuni's brother, and Prabhupada made him the first temple president and his brother the first temple treasurer. That's me getting up to dance now. And Prabhupada had them pose for my first Lord Nrsingadev painting. He had one of them be Hiranyakashipu, the big demon, and the other be Lord Nrsingadev, and he put one on the other one's lap, and he showed them how they should pose for Lord Nrsingadev to rip apart the demon Hiranyakashipu. And Prabhupada also posed for the painting, making his eyes crossed and showing himself ripping the demon with his hands and showing long nails. And this painting on the window of Matchless Gifts is from a copy of a print that Prabhupada gave me of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan party. His performing Sankirtan at the courtyard of the house of Srivas Thakur. And Prabhupada pointed out who the different personalities in the painting are. That's Mukunda and his sons, that's Haridas Thakur, and who the Panchatattva members are. So and that was my very first painting that I did for Prabhupada. And it was so bad, everything was out of proportion. The feet were gigantic and the heads were small, and the hand was coming out someplace that wasn't connected to the body. But Prabhupada was so encouraging that when he saw the painting, all the devotees would always gather around him. So he said to everybody, Krishna has sent, like Krishna sent me to paint, even though it was so bad. He was so encouraging. And on that day, he also invited me to come and paint up in his quarters. So for the next months, I was,
of course, delighted and could immediately see that we had made the right choice once we saw Prabhupada. He seemed to light up the whole room. We couldn't take our eyes off of him. And obviously, if he attracted our gurus like Allen Ginsberg had a great influence on most of us. He was one of the leading members of what was called the Beat generation. He and Jack Kerouac practically single-handedly changed the consciousness of millions of young Americans with their ideas that life should be lived in a very open manner with freedoms and pursuing higher things and throw off the old shackles. Prabhupada had the stamp of approval of the Beat generation. He was for us.
So this area is known as Hippie Hill in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. Almost every day, everyone would gather at Hippie Hill, and sometimes the devotees would come and chant. And this particular day was like any other day there. But as I remember entering the park, and what attracted me was the beauty and the sound of I didn't even know at the time it was the Hare Krishna mantra. People had been chanting all around the Haight-Ashbury area for months and months prior to this. The idea that Srila Prabhupada was there that particular day just captured me. That through his sound vibration, he just reached into me, reached into my heart, and somehow or other said, this one is mine. It wasn't maybe a year or so later that I had actually started to join the temple.
Prabhupada had introduced something that all of the youth were really attracted to, and he was really something of a Pied Piper. You can see here how much everybody is participating. These are not just devotees, but all of the people here in the park were completely open to this. As a matter of fact, so much so that they considered the Hare Krishna to be the hippie religion at this point in 1967 in San Francisco. So many hippies were in love with Prabhupada and in love with the devotees and considered themselves very much a part of Hare Krishna.
And did a lot of singing in the park. And so I used to come down, help out, and sing along too. I had been singing Hare Krishna since '63, and it seemed to me that almost as if reinforcements had arrived from India. My idea at the time was that the more Swamis the better, and the more spiritual teachers the better, because America seemed to have sunk in a morass of aggressive and murderous militarism in those days. That was right in the middle of the Vietnam War, and I'd come home from India via Saigon. So anybody going out on the street, particularly, and singing in the street seemed to lighten the whole American scene. That seemed like a breakthrough of joy, dancing, human voice. And so it seemed like a marvelous social contribution.
This historic footage gives us a glimpse into the first Rathayatra celebrated in the Western world in 1967. On another track, there's a kirtan that goes with this Rathayatra, and it was the melody that goes something like this. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And that went for hours and hours as we sang it on the cart. A few wonderful things about this Rathayatra were that the crowd that gathered alongside of the cart of partly hippies that knew nothing about Lord Jagannath and partly some hippies who had tasted Krishna Prasad in our temple and sampled the nectar of the holy name in our kirtans were very genuinely enthusiastic to celebrate this Rathayatra. Lord Jagannath, Subhadra, and Balaram faced different directions on the cart, so no matter what side you were on, you were able to get face-to-face darshan of their lordships. There was a pastime with this cart where the engine of the flatbread truck that the deities were seated on stalled. And when we told that to Srila Prabhupada, he said that this was not uncommon, that the cart would stall, even if it was pulled by hand, and stop at various places along the route. So he was happy to see that somehow in San Francisco, without even knowing about this pastime, our cart stalled on the hill. The route was full length from the Haight-Ashbury all the way to the sea. And when the cart arrived at the sea, there was a very wonderful kirtan on the beach.
Hovering by the ocean for 3 weeks. Gursinner and I were staying there, along with Kirtananda. The 4 of us were staying in a beach bungalow. And they sent a copy of this reel-to-reel tape. And it was so wild. And it was a brand new tune. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. They made up their own tunes. Unheard of in New York. This was not done. And it was wild. I mean, horns and cymbals and you name it. It was a full wild party sounding kirtan. And some of the devotees in New York were like, oh my gosh, what is this? But Prabhupada loved it. He was so happy. And I noticed this. He was so happy that they were still chanting. It didn't matter that it was a different tune. It didn't matter that they were wild hippies with dancing and frenzies, and probably some of them were intoxicated. Most of them even were still taking intoxication. Prabhupada loved it. And there was another one that they sent called Narada Muni, the Eternal Spaceman, which was a little record that they made. They were creative and innovative and far out. That's the kind of people that were in San Francisco. And Prabhupada encouraged them. Whereas the nature in New York was to criticize them and put them down because they weren't conservative enough. Prabhupada didn't have that mood at all. Instead, he encouraged both. And they were a little wild for me, too, because I wasn't as conservative as a New Yorker, but I was somewhat conservative. But what amazed me was when we went back there, sometime later, we traveled back to San Francisco with Prabhupada. They had completely changed. The chanting had purified them. They were totally different. They were beautiful. I mean, we're talking about Mukunda, Yamuna, Shamsundar, Malati, all these early devotees. Malati was so wild. And they were really heartfelt people, willing to try anything, and they loved Prabhupada, and they were out to do whatever they could.
Apartment at 26 2nd Avenue. He had recently returned to New York from New Jersey and San Francisco. He had had a stroke. He was not in good health, and he decided that he wanted to go to India to recuperate. And we were really distraught because we felt if he goes to India, he's going to stay there. He doesn't want to come back here because it's bad for his health, the cold winters. And we didn't know what to do. We thought, well, we'll never see him again, or if we want to see him, we'll have to go to India. How can we keep him here? Of course, we couldn't keep him there. So the devotees asked me to make a simple documentary, just pictures, moving pictures of Srila Prabhupada. We had photographs to look at. The devotees wanted a film to look at, a movie of Srila Prabhupada, simply something to meditate on so we could feel close to him. And so I asked Srila Prabhupada if I could do that, and he said yes. So I'm simply in his room with him, and he very kindly tolerated my presence there as I made the movie. I didn't direct Srila Prabhupada at all. I didn't ask him or tell him to do anything. I just followed his lead. This was with an 8mm camera, very simple means. And this was the last day that Srila Prabhupada was in New York. He was leaving the next day for India. Kirtanananda was preparing his packing cases to go on the plane. It was bigger than suitcases, they were trunks. You see, this was really our Prabhupada Murti while he was away in India. The devotees would look at this film, we would just chant our rounds, or we would play a tape of Srila Prabhupada singing a bhajan, or have a kirtan while looking at it. So really not much happens in this movie, except we're looking at Prabhupada and he's looking at us. I would have to change rolls of film, and as I did that, one time Srila Prabhupada asked me to show him how the film, which was AGFA, black and white film, high speed, how the film was clipped onto the reel with a little plastic gripper. And Srila Prabhupada asked me to show him how it worked. And after I showed him, he said, "They think of everything." When Srila Prabhupada arrived in India, he was going to India for his health. And when he arrived in India and got off the plane, Kirtanananda, who was with him, who went with him as his servant, said that it was like walking into an oven in a letter that was sent to us, and Kirtanananda's comments were there, and then Srila Prabhupada followed up with his comments, and he said, "I find it quite bracy myself." So that was why he went to India, to get braced up. So it's a pretty simple film, but the beauty of Srila Prabhupada is what makes it fascinating.
I was doing a sign that he asked me to do upstairs in that first place where he was offering arti, a sign of the Hare Krishna mantra, because there was going to be a big program at Tompkins Square Park. So the sign was about 4 or 5 feet on oak tag, and I had to sprawl my whole body across it to reach to the other end. We didn't have easels in those days. So I also apologized to Prabhupada when he came in the room that I'm sorry that I'm offending the holy name. So he told the story of when Krishna had a headache and the gopis took the dust from their feet to put on his head to relieve his headache. And they didn't care if they would go to hell as long as Krishna would be cured. So when I apologized, Prabhupada told me that story, and he said it's fine because it's for service.
He used to sit and turn the globe, and he would meditate on the different countries. And he would say, "Brahmananda, you shall go to Russia. Gorsinder, you shall go to Japan. Somebody else, you shall go to South America." You have to understand, we had no money, we had no manpower, we had nothing. We were a handful of teenagers. 10 people in their early 20s who were rather eccentric, all of us, because we had rejected our cultural values and were following him like a Pied Piper. And he was telling us about these different countries we were going to go to and open temples. He had his plan. It was not haphazardly done. I have a beautiful picture of Prabhupada sitting and turning his globe. He did it a lot. He meditated on the globe. He looked at the different countries. You would see him doing it a lot. And he was planning. He planned the takeover of Russia long before he ever went to Russia. This was like a part of what he knew he had to come to this world and do. We just didn't know what all he was doing. Although sometimes in Montreal, when we had a lot of time and he would talk, he used to talk to me about his different plans. We had no money. We lived in a little flat. We had rats too. There was nothing, and yet he was telling me how he was going to have a World Sankirtan party. And he also told me how he wanted to have a big auditorium where people could come and watch bhajans and hear bhajans and see plays and Krishna conscious things rather than going to the cinemas. He felt the cinemas were drawing people into another world. He had plans of doing this. And when I go to Bombay and I see that great big auditorium, I go, you know, he said he was going to do this. It's just like if I'm a pauper and I tell you I'm going to build Disneyland. And that's what it was like. But I never disbelieved anything he said. I just listened. I was just always like listening to him. And he liked to talk about what he was going to do. And he talked about many things.
Now this painting, which was done by Jadharani, is a painting of Vrindavan. It's the Madan Mohan temple. This is one of the first paintings that Jadharani did. And it's Madan Mohan. Madan Mohan temple that Sanatana Goswami erected for the first deity in Lord Chaitanya's movement. Prabhupada would give her a picture and she would copy that into a painting. Prabhupada, he hung it right above his head. He sat underneath this. So it's the first Western connection, you might say, with Vrindavan. And here's the personification of Vrindavan sitting there.
I did this painting, and then Prabhupada was going back to India in July of '67. And we were all devastated that he was going. But then he looked at this picture and he said, if you look at this picture, then we'll all be together, even though I'm in India. And if you chant Hare Krishna, then we're all packed up tight, even though I'm in India and you're here.
And of course, everybody was a brand new devotee. And nobody really knew much of anything. So there was also a lot of nonsense going on, and there, you know, fighting and things like that. So I became disturbed, and I went to see Prabhupada to complain about some of the things that devotees were doing. And Prabhupada said to me, if you don't like what they are doing, then you set the example. A little later, I again went to see him to complain about devotees, and Srila Prabhupada said, what do you want from them? They are trying to serve Krishna. And the third time was in 1972, I think. I was living in San Francisco, and I wrote Prabhupada a letter just complaining about so many things. And Prabhupada wrote me back, you know, I complain people who do bad things and they're the example and this and that. And Prabhupada said, who said that they're an example? He said, anyway, what are you doing? All you're doing is making money and spending it on your own household life. And he ended the letter and said, the whole movement is meant for service. Because I had said, I don't understand this movement. Prabhupada said, you've been with me for so many years and you still don't understand. When will you understand? He said, the whole movement is meant for service.
Oh, here's the Jagannath deities that Shyam Sundar made. He made 4 sets. When Prabhupada came to the airport, we had to collect the baggage. We walked over to the baggage place where the baggage came out. These big wooden crates came, and Prabhupada pointed, there was his suitcase, but then he said also, these wooden crates. Of course, we had no idea what was in them. Neither did we ask. And we brought the crates back. So these crates were in the next room, and Prabhupada told us to go and open the crates. So we went and opened the crates, and there were these Jagannath deities. But we had never seen Jagannath in New York, because, you know, Jagannath came from San Francisco, Puri. Just as Prabhupada made Vrindavan in New York, he made San Francisco Puri. So we look at these Jagannath deities, we can't figure out, I mean, it's not Krishna. What is it? And then somebody was saying, making jokes that these look like North American Indian, it's a totem pole. And there's 3 parts to the totem pole. So we were trying to figure out which one is on top, which one is in the middle, which one is on the bottom to make the totem pole. That's what we were thinking. There's the ladder that I was painting the apartment with. I didn't quite finish. And then Prabhupada walked in and he saw us, and we were like joking, like, wow, this is really far out, an Indian totem pole. And then Prabhupada said, this is Lord Jagannath, the Lord of the universe. Bow down. And everybody, boom, hit the floor. That's how Prabhupada introduced Jagannath worship. So those deities were worshipped, but we had drunks coming into the storefront and so on. It wasn't proper to have them available or vulnerable, you know. So we kept them in the apartment and worshipped there.
Yadubara, Madhavaya, Kesavaya, Namaha.